I've written several articles, and I've had 2 or 3 articles in the past that's upset the local community. I had the audacity the week that 9 cops in Baton Rouge and Dallas were assassinated to write an article saying that there was a war against law enforcement. That's not a unique term. The FBI said that. Heather McDonald said that.
Sheepdog Nation, I'm really excited to bring you this interview today. We have Major Travis Yates. He is the owner of Law Officer. If you have not checked that out, you can go to lawofficer.com, or you can go check them out on Facebook. They have a huge following, huge presence for law enforcement. Major, it's exciting to have you. Can you introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, I'm a 27-year law enforcement veteran here in the Midwest. I've been very, very blessed to do a lot of different things. I've taught officers around the country for the last 15 years. I've been in 48 states and 3 countries. Obviously, I've been writing for about the same amount of time. I've written several hundred articles on various topics. The last few years, I've really focused on leadership as I've seen that struggle in the profession. I wrote a book last year called The Courageous Police Leader, and just fighting the good fight. You know, I'm a little bit unusual in the fact that I've been very outspoken, and I'm still on the job. And that has created more than one problem for me, in particular, a huge problem at the moment. But I just believe that just because you're on the job doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to speak out. I mean, we know more than anybody, so we should be speaking out. But law enforcement has been sort of, we're not empowered to do that. And that's created a lot of problems. That's why you see what you see today with very little actual evidence to go behind it, because law enforcement doesn't have the voice they should. So, you know, I've gotten a lot of opportunities to do a lot of neat things and to meet a lot of different people. So I certainly appreciate you having me on it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. You have a book. Tell us about your book.
Yeah, I met a guy about 4 years ago by the name of Stacy Etel. And you can just go to Google and type in the Stacy Etel story. And I met him in a class. I was teaching a class. He came up to me and he kind of told me this crazy story, how he was a commander on a scene of an officer-involved shooting. The shooting was justified. The Attorney General, the Department of Education, the DA all cleared the shooting. Shooting was in policy, but these riots and protests began on campus. Now, this was 2010, so this is kind of pre-Ferguson, kind of before that was the norm. And he basically said that they came to him and said, listen, we've got to fire the officer that fired the weapon, and we need you to get behind that. And he said, well, he didn't do anything wrong. Why would you do that? And they said, well, we've got to do something to make all this controversy go away. And so he basically said, well, I'm not going to get behind that. So they said, well, we're going to fire you then. And so they fired him. And he was a lieutenant, pretty well-respected guy, and lost everything. He couldn't get another job because what the internet did to him, because of the stories they did to him. They, you know, obviously it was a foreign exchange student from, I believe, Africa. And so obviously he was branded a racist, and he literally lost everything. His wife had to pawn their wedding ring to pay a month's rent. He lost his pension. He just lost it all. And he tells me this story. I just thought it was so crazy that this could happen. I mean, how in the world could you do nothing wrong and be destroyed? And so I told him that day that I asked him, I said, well, how long ago did this happen? He said, 6 years ago. I said, well, who has told this story? Like the story you just told me, who told this story? And he goes, nobody's told this story. I just thought that was unbelievable. I go, how in the world could this be going on? And quite frankly, I almost thought he wasn't even telling me the truth, because it just seems so wrong to me. So I looked into it and I saw that he was absolutely correct. No one had told his story. So I commissioned a writer to write a story about him and his wife. And it's called the Stacy Etel story. And we published that on Law Officer. And Law Officer's been around for about 16 years. It was a magazine first. Many people recognize that. It's just a website now. And the article went pretty berserk, and people got the story. It kind of opened some doors for him, and he started speaking and writing and doing some things. WatchGuard hired him to do some seminars. And so we developed a leadership seminar based on kind of that story, how we need to quit. This needs to stop happening in law enforcement. We started teaching that seminar, and it's been pretty popular, but I kind of got to thinking a couple of years ago that, you know, most people can't come to this seminar. We're teaching it 6-7 times a year, but wouldn't it be neat if we could put this in book form so more people can get it? And so last July 4th, we published a book called The Courageous Police Leader, a survival guide to combating cowards, chaos, and lies. And quite frankly, it took off. It was a lot more popular than I imagined. It's on Amazon now. And a lot of people were able to, have sent us comments about that book. It opens up with Stacy's story. He wrote the foreword on it. And of course I wrote the book. And so that leads into, that was a year ago. And then, so what I tell people is I I've written about this topic. I've talked about this topic, and now I guess I could say I'm very fortunate. I get to live this topic, and it's certainly much easier to talk and write about than live it. I can tell you that for sure.
Tell me more. How are you living it? Tell Sheepdog Nation.
Yeah, I have been very vocal, as I said, about all these issues in law enforcement. Very few people are able to talk about, and I've written several articles, and I've had 2 or 3 articles in the past that upset the local community. I had the audacity the week that 9 cops in Baton Rouge and Dallas were assassinated to write an article saying that there was a war against law enforcement. That's not a unique term. The FBI said that, Heather McDonald said that. But what they did is they twisted that and they said, Travis says there's a war against black people. Well, that's crazy. Of course, I didn't say that. But it got a little bit of local run. It got me transferred. It got me investigated, and all this and that. Because nobody wants to stand up and just say, well, he's kind of right. 9 officers were assassinated this week. That's why he said it. Mm-hmm. And so I was aware of that. And that, quite frankly, didn't bother me. And so I knew I kind of had a target on my back, but I kept speaking because I think that's what people want, is they want you to shut up. Yeah. Their narrative, that narrative wins if that's the only narrative out there. But I've got the facts on my side. I got the data on my side. So I've been going on a local radio show here in town for about a year and talk about national police issues. And I was on last Monday, a week ago today, and it was a 40-minute interview. About 20 of the minutes we talked about the myth of systematic racism in law enforcement. And people could disagree with me. But my take is, when you talk about systematic racism, that is profession-wide racism, you have to look at the collective data, right? Do we have individual racists? Of course we do. Every profession has them. But when you're talking about a system that is inherently racist, well, you would look at the entire data and see that. And I talked about the Washington Post data. That is since 2015 till yesterday, out of all the unarmed people shot and killed by policemen, whites, it was 3%, blacks, it was 2%. We're actually killing more whites unarmed than blacks. And if race didn't play a factor, that number would be pretty even, and that's pretty much darn even, 3% versus 2%. And I went on to talk about some of Roland Fryer's research and Heather McDonald's research. And Fryer did some research in 2018 and Fryer wasn't exactly friendly to law enforcement. He was really shocked by what he found out, but he actually found out that you would expect, if there was some sort of, if you compared shootings to violent crime, which is what his data on, he would have expected that African Americans would have been actually shot more. In fact, he found out that they were actually shot 24% less than they typically would have been. And that to me is a good data point. That means that law enforcement is not shooting people at the rate that people are saying they're shooting people at. Essentially, what he was saying is there's not systematic racism because African Americans are actually being shot at a lesser rate. And I kind of talked about that. I even couched that because I knew that that's probably some data that people weren't aware of. So I actually started that phrase off with talking about where I got that research. And then I said the research, and then I actually finished that with, and this isn't me talking, this is the data and the research out there. So it's not me with my opinion. I'm just telling you what the research is. And quite frankly, I didn't think much of it. I'd actually listened to the show afterwards because if anybody listened to it, it was a pretty, it was a lot of information being thrown around, and sometimes in a radio format. You may trip up on a few words and say some things that could be taken out of context. So I listened to the show afterwards, and I thought to myself, there's not really anything there that really jumps out at me. And 24 hours later, a reporter here in town, and I got to give him credit, I won't name the paper, but they have a direct pipeline to national news. They took that middle sentence where I basically cited the data, and he twisted that and said that I said that we should go kill more black people. Obviously, he knew what he was doing, right? He knew exactly what he was doing, and he left out the first sentence. He actually got my quote wrong. He had to change a few words to make it sound as bad as he could, and he left out the third sentence, which said me saying this isn't me saying it. And he printed that middle sentence, and he put a bunch of stuff above that. And of course, in today's social media world, it went nuts, and the national media, to them, it's just a headline. It's a big old nasty headline to get a lot of clicks. They don't care who they destroy. And they have literally destroyed everything I've worked for 27 years. My family and I are in the middle of death threats right now. I'm hunkered down at the house. I'm putting a surveillance system in. My department is investigating me, which I think to myself, well, I told the truth. All right. I mean, I can't help what a reporter does. But it's very much a very dark time. And it goes to show you the media has been weaponized against law enforcement. No doubt about it. It doesn't matter what you say, do, or whatever. They're going to twist something to make it seem like you did something else to try to make you a villain. And I had a handful of extra jobs that helped support my family. I've lost all of those jobs. They fired me immediately. Didn't even ask me a question. I had I've got my kids in private school. I'm wondering if my school going to kick my kids out of private school. Out of the probably hundreds of media outlets that reported this, 3 actually called me for a quote, right? And the original article, they couldn't call me for a quote because they wouldn't have been able to write what they wrote, right? So they knew exactly what they were doing. And and so I've got 2 choices here, Autumn. I can either just crawl in a hole and just give up, right? Because that's what I think people want. Or I could stand up and say, you know what? You can't do this to people. You can't do it to people. I'm going to fight. I'm going to get legal representation. I'm going to clear my name the best of my ability. If you can ever do that on the internet, right? It's always going to be there forever. And I'm going to stand up for the rest of the profession because nobody else is. Because what they're using a cannon on them. They're using a cannon at us, and we're throwing little pebbles back. Because think about it, law enforcement, we can't even write a Facebook post without getting fired these days, right? Even if it's true. Right. And so they're able to use the conglomerate of the corporate media to just destroy our profession, destroy individuals, especially if you speak up on behalf of law enforcement. And we can't even fight back. And so I'm going to. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be sort of the poster child for what the media does to people. But I can guarantee you they haven't heard the last from me. There's going to be a battle, and there's going to be, at the end of the day, we're going to be able to hopefully help a lot of law enforcement. Because this is not going to stop. Every day they're destroying somebody else. I know. And it's the only profession where you could be destroyed. I used to say it's the only profession you can be destroyed on the very next call for doing everything right. Well, who knew in my mind it was a phone call that would destroy me, not an actual call for service because I phoned in the interview. But it's really unbelievable. And I'm trying to see the positive in this, that I get to live this and tell a story and to try to help others. But man, there are dark moments. There has been a few twists for the good. Tucker Carlson called me on. I didn't think I'd get any lower than Friday morning because GoFundMe had just shut the account down, and obviously that was the height of all this was Friday. And Tucker Carlson called about 11 o'clock and said, "Well, will you come on the show?" And of course, I immediately start going into all this nonsense, and he was kind of like, "Yeah, they do that to everybody. We want to talk to you about this other article you wrote, that we really liked, and talk about how law enforcement's leaving the profession." Just by sheer weirdness, 12 hours before this happened, I wrote an article on Law Officer called "America, We Are Leaving." Yeah, and, very familiar with that. I shared it. And it became the largest article in our history. Over 3 million people as of now have seen it. I've given interviews in Moscow and Great Britain and everywhere else about this article. And then, of course, Fox News. And I thought, well, what's the odds of that? At the same time I'm watching Fox News talk about my article, I'm on their website for this other stuff, So I don't really believe in coincidences, Autumn. There's something going on here. But anyway, Tucker brought me on. He didn't have to. He's getting advertisers canceled every day because of his stance. But he was the only one that would speak to me, and he defended me in the short time I was on, and I've got to fight because if I lay down, then they're going to keep doing it. Wow. That's a lot of stuff going on. You got a lot of stuff going on, huh? A few moving plates, yeah. A few moving plates. So how can we help? How can everyone help? The biggest thing is I've got the real story out there, and that is at a website called defendtheheroes.com. Okay. And we obviously there's a donation way there, but mainly I wanted people to get the real story and what happened, and it lines it out. We're going to change that to just a P.O. box for checks until we get the payment method, because as I know, they've shut down 2 different payment methods for donations because they know that's the only way I can fight is by funds. And so I don't know the backstory on why that's happening. I got a feeling why that's happening, right? There's a faction of this community that wants to just do anything to us they can. It's not enough to get your job out of them. They want to destroy any way in the world you could ever make a living in the future. Just destroy you mentally, physically, financially, as much as they can, whether you do anything wrong or not, right? I mean, I think we have enough people in this profession that do things wrong, but that's not good enough. They want to destroy anybody and everybody that may stand up for this profession. So, obviously spread that website. Unfortunately, as it stands now, to be safe, we're going to have people send checks in the mail because I can't risk another, we're going to try to get something up today, hopefully. But I think spread that website. And what I want people to understand is that's not just for Travis. I never wanted to be someone having to raise a legal defense fund. Yeah. But we're going to take anything we get above and beyond that. We're going to form a foundation called the Lean Foundation. It's called the Law Enforcement Advocacy Network. And it's going to be designed to help other people out exactly what happened to me. And that means when it happens to you and you did nothing wrong, because I can tell you, you can't even form a thought when you're going in the middle of this. I mean, it was so dark, I couldn't even hardly get out of bed. I couldn't even formulate a thought. And I kind of count myself as kind of a macho guy. I mean, I was just absolutely paralyzed by this. And I had a friend in Florida that reached out to me and said, listen, turn your TV off, turn your phone off. I got this. Mm-hmm. And he literally went in and captured all the media reports, captured all the evidence. He put up the website. He put together the messaging. He did all of this stuff. And it kind of got us thinking. I'm like, that's exactly what we need, because, your local unions aren't set up for this. Your major organizations like IECP, they're not going to touch this because they're trying to get the corporate dollar. They're not going to want to offend anybody. There's really no organization for law enforcement to come by our side when this happens. And this happens every day. You look at the NRA. I mean, can you imagine what the Second Amendment would be, or gun owners would be without the NRA? It's that organization that defends people that, with their Second Amendment rights. Well, this is a First Amendment right issue, and many times just our Bill of Rights issue in law enforcement. So we're going to put together a team, and Autumn, you may have a big hand in playing that, because there's a big mental aspect with this too, of when this happens to people and they're at their lowest point, we come along beside them and prop them up in every way we can, whether it's legally, mentally, physically, financially, and kind of give them that crisis management they need at that time. Because, if you're the CEO of Apple, you have that. You have the resources to make that happen. You've got millions, gazillions of dollars. You can go hire that out. Right. I didn't have that. I mean, I'm not poor by any means, but when people were contacting me going, hey, I can message this for you, I just need a $10,000 retainer. I'm like, what are you talking about? I didn't have any means to do that. So we've got to provide this support for law enforcement. So we're going to parlay this for good. We're going to pivot this for good. And we're going to launch a foundation out of this to kind of stand up against what people are doing against law enforcement.
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking and I'm listening to you. And do you know how many people would just lay down? Do you know how many people would not be getting out of bed? And do you know how many people would probably take down law officer, take down everything you've done, everything you've put out there, and just try to stay safe? Because clearly you said that you're receiving death threats and all sorts of shit, right? But here's the thing. It's people like you, who are going to change. You're going to make a change. We need to. I think what's important, and a huge reason as to why I wanted you to come on right now, is because I think this is the time that we have got to stop allowing law enforcement to chew us up and spit us out, right? They say that, the common saying in law enforcement is that we eat our own. Like and I think really, unfortunately, we're coming to a time where we have to stick together. We have to. And not for wrong reasons and not for inappropriate reasons or anything like that, but just based on what you're going through.
Yeah, I knew this before it happened because I've listened to other officer stories. I mean, you look at these other officers it's happened to that didn't do anything wrong, whether it was Darren Wilson and Ferguson or Stacey Tail that didn't do anything wrong. And they've just been destroyed and they've had to move and hide their name and location and all this other stuff. But they told me this story. They said, man, when it happens, you know who your real friends are, right? Mm-hmm. And I've seen that happen is people scatter like fleas. They don't want to be anywhere near people that you've done things for, people you've helped move their houses, people that you've gone through dark alleys with. Man, they run for the hills. And then you, if you're lucky, you have a couple, 2 or 3 people that come beside you and say, whatever you need, we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And so what I think this foundation needs to do is we need to be that resource for these officers. And it seems wild to talk about it because I'm obviously in the middle of my darkness now, but there'll be another side of this and we'll come out of this. And hopefully when it comes to the legal leads, we'll be successful in that. But even if we aren't, we have to fight. That's what I told my team. I said, I don't care if we don't win $1. It's not what it's about. We have to fight because they want you to quit, Autumn. They want you to stop because what they're trying to do is destroy our profession. Mm-hmm. And they're using all these crazy means to do it. And if we give up, then that's a dark time for not only us, but all of America.
So, what's your opinion on what's going on in Seattle?
Well, frankly, I haven't had a whole lot of time to look at that, but that is, that's a slippery slope, and that's where you end up when you start doing what you do to law enforcement, right?
But that's what I'm saying, right? So they don't want law enforcement, right? So but does the whole America want to live like that?
No, and I think what we're dealing with is the silent majority, we're dealing with people that are scared to say anything, scared to take a stand because they see what happens to you when you do, right? So that's a dangerous place to be when you've got, listen, to this day as I speak, the vast majority of Americans support law enforcement, but they ain't saying a word about it because they're afraid of being canceled. And if we don't start standing up as a society and start standing up against this, that's what it leads to. And then it gets to the point where it's going to be too late to recover from. And, quite frankly, Ferguson was very difficult for us. And that was a legal justified shooting. It's just insane to think what came out of Ferguson and when it was a legal justified shooting. But look where we are today, especially when you talk about Atlanta. But this seems so chaotic. I'm not sure we'll ever be the same, and I'm not sure we're going to be the same in a good way. I mean, I don't see. I think there's some argument to be made that out of Ferguson we did some good things right. I like body cameras. I like some of the things we did. I obviously like de-escalation, but we kind of went as far as we could without getting into officer safety and jeopardizing what we do. This seems to be too far out there, and the next step is it goes to show you that once you do this, we'll do it. Okay, do this, we'll do it. Well, the next logical step is we don't need police, or we need to defund police. By the way, defunding police, even at a level of 10%, gets rid of us essentially. You don't get to hire anybody. You don't get to buy a paperclip when you do that. Our personnel costs are generally over 90%. So they know that. And so the Americans that are falling for that, they might as well abolish law enforcement because we'll be report takers, and there won't be any crime being enforced.
Well, see, I was having a discussion in one of my groups full of first responders, and one of the discussions, obviously, because everybody is very upset over everything they're seeing in Atlanta as well as everything else, right? But one of the conversations that they were having was the fact that they were like, why don't police, if this is what's going to end up happening is police officers, if they don't abolish us, then we're going to end up being like firefighters. We're going to be sitting in the station, and when it's a really bad call, we'll come out, and everything else we're not coming, and you don't have enough of us. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think we're probably already there, truth be known. 90% plus of our use of force and shootings are calls for service. We're not out stopping people and getting in altercations. And so that's part of the problem with that attitude we have, is that none of that stuff that they call controversial ever goes away, because the vast majority of our contacts are people that commit violent crimes. Citizens call us, we show up, they point them out, we encounter them, and then one thing leads to another. Just like Wendy's in Atlanta last night. That was a call. I mean, it wasn't like the officers found the guy and targeted him. The citizens called for help. We went there, and then one thing leads to another. And so I think we're probably, truthfully known, already glorified firefighters without the pornography. And I'm sure somebody will take that out of context too. I'll get a headline tomorrow saying I'm advocating pornography. What are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
But the truth is most of our altercations are coming on calls anyway. The citizens are calling us on, and that's who I feel sorry for. That's who really loses in this, Autumn, is the people that live in neighborhoods with high crime. Many minorities, by the way, many disenfranchised people that need us. They're going to be the ones that lose on this when there's no law enforcement around, or law enforcement has been decimated to the point where we can't respond in a good amount of time. And that's what nobody sees here. It's not about ending law enforcement because law enforcement is corrupt. It's about control, and they can't have control if law enforcement's there trying to, do what we do. So it's a pretty spooky time. I personally believe, unfortunately, we don't recover from this. I mean, obviously law enforcement will be around. It will look nothing like what law enforcement looked like recently. It will be completely different, and time will tell, I guess, what that's going to look like. But it's a pretty horrific time.
So let me ask you this, as far as, because you wrote your leadership book, right, and talked about the courageous leader. Now, what do you think of this? All of this means for leaders as a whole in law enforcement?
Well, I talk about in the book that I didn't think that our leadership was prepared for Ferguson. We weren't prepared for the lies and the chaos and to combat that, because we sort of many of us took a stance, unfortunately, we just said, okay, what can we do to make you happy, right? Well, then once you do that, then it's okay. Then you have to double down, and you have to give more, and you have to give more, you have to give more. Well, now we're at a point where, I mean, we've got Drew Brees apologizing for liking the American flag. I mean, that's the point we're in. He's apologized like 6 times. I'm so sorry I defended the American flag, And you've got someone like me that literally cited scientific data, and I'm getting told to apologize. I'm like, what do I have to apologize for? You're attacking. I cited a scientific journal, right? I mean, so we're at the point now where we are reacting based on the reaction, right? Like if someone's offended, we're supposed to react to that and say, oh, we're so sorry we offended you. Well, you can't, a society cannot survive if that's our take. I mean, because everybody somewhere is always going to be offended about something. And so we're at the point where I think our leaders think that they can actually lead without offending, and you can't lead without offending. If you're going to play in this arena, people are going to be offended, and you're going to have to just stand up and tell the truth and be honest about it. And I think you're better off by doing that. Now, hell will come your way as I'm living right now, but at the end of the day, I will be better off by standing by the truth and telling people why I did what I did and why I was truthful about it. The people that are lying, that story doesn't last. That story doesn't come out at the end. They may get a temporary feel good about that, but at the end of the day, the truth, I still believe, matters. And that's the way I think in law enforcement, we've got to stand up for that.
And so as an individual officer listening to this, can you give them some advice? How to navigate this?
Well, they may not like my advice because I was the biggest defender of this profession.
Me too. Still, I know.
And until recent weeks. I mean, I would be like, listen, you need to come, and if you got to serve your community. It's the best job on the planet. Yeah, I know there's some kind of crazy people out there. But I'm almost to the point, and it pains me to say this, Autumn, is I think the risk is too much for the reward. When you could do everything right and you can get thrown in prison, right? When you do everything right and your name and credibility can be destroyed, when you can literally just do everything right and your life will never be the same again. It's not just for me, it's my family. You know, I have more pain in what my family's having to go through because their last name is my last name. All my kids had to change their Facebook names. You know, they're going to, the rest of their life, when they call in a food order, they're going to have to give a different last name in my area, especially. And so it affects your families. And I'm afraid the risk is too high unless this country turns back. And I just don't see if that's ever going to happen. And so I know that puts officers in a really bad spot, especially if you can't retire, especially if you've got 14, 15 years on. But I would say this: get off the streets, get in a position to where you're not having encounters with violent suspects, because we don't have time to go into it, but I'm going to tell you right now, at the end of the day, everything that caused this George Floyd incident, at the end of the day, they're going to find that to be an excited delirium case. All the evidence is starting to come out on that. And if you're going to prosecute me for a dude taking methamphetamine and fentanyl and having a heart attack, and we could talk about all the other things and the next stuff all day long, but I'm saying at the end of the day, there's a couple dozen of those cases that happen every year and officers don't get prosecuted in. And I understand this one's a little bit different, but if I have to risk going to prison for a dude that takes massive amounts of drugs and his heart blows up on him, now don't get me wrong. I mean, this is a horrific case, but they're now going back and looking at all these excited delirium cases and looking to prosecute cops. And there's probably not a community out there that hasn't had a couple of those in time. The risks are just tremendous, you know, and I just can't in my right mind recommend anybody do the job. And that sounds terrible. This has been a great, gratifying experience for me, and a great blessing, but they're throwing cops in jail for doing their job. And they're destroying people's lives for doing their job. And I don't think any profession could survive if they did that. Like if a doctor knew that if a patient died accidentally, he would lose his career and be ruined, no one would go be a doctor, right? That's why they have medical malpractice insurance and everything else, right? They're protected. In this job, it's totally different.
You think it'll change?
I want to think it would. I want to hope it would. But we're going to have a lot of good Americans stand up for it to change. Yeah. I think what you're going to end up happening, Autumn, is you're going to have pockets in this country that it's not like that. You're going to have pockets in this country where law enforcement is still law enforcement and the law enforcement is treated right. But then you're going to have pockets in this country, and you mentioned what's going on in Seattle and other places where it's over with. Like they're never going to get it back. So I think the country will be very much divided, unfortunately, in that way, where if you want to be in law enforcement, you better go to certain states or certain areas to do the job, just to protect yourself. And even that doesn't mean it won't change in 10 years or 15 years, right? Even in some communities that were traditionally more conservative for law enforcement, you're seeing that kind of flip in certain areas. I mean, who would have thought that Omaha, Nebraska would have riots, for goodness sakes? I mean, it's crazy. And so So you never can guarantee that.
Hmm. Some of the mastermind members have a couple of questions for you. The first one, they want to know what your most gratifying moment in your career has been.
I developed the Tulsa Police Athletic League about 3 years ago, and got to be around a lot of kids and help kids. And I think we all do it for that reason, but it was the first time that I really had an opportunity to put something like that together and be involved at that level. And that was very gratifying. So it probably was that, is putting together the PAL here locally, which, by the way, they'll never let me touch again after this last week. But that was pretty gratifying.
At least you started it, right?
Yeah.
If you were the powers above you, okay, what would you do for somebody in your shoes? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think the only thing you can do is try to give the public a accurate sense of what happened, right? So you tell the public, this is what happened. This is what the news media did. So we encourage you to look at the facts, right? Because I think everybody's going off this social media mindset where they read a headline and they lose their mind. And so you've got to give a sense of calm, so to speak, to the mob or to the people that are upset. And so you got to give them a sense of calm. To do that, you've got to slow everything down, and you have to say, this is exactly what happened. And if you see the transcript or you see what I said, nobody has an issue with it. It was actually the media that made it an issue, is what they do. And but that's what you have to do. Listen, as I said in my book, there is going to be controversy in this job. Leaders can't run from controversy. You have to face it head on. But if you just simply apologize, and don't explain to people what's going on, it's going to almost feed that mayhem. And so what I would say is I think our leaders have to stand up for that. Now, many of them don't, because they're also scared of being treated the same way, and I understand that. But I think you've got to, when things get chaotic, you've got to bring a sense of peace to it and explain to people exactly what's going on. Now, if the officer was completely wrong, you agree with that and you put the facts out. That's what's so concerning about Minneapolis, is there's so much information they had that next day that they're not giving to the public. They're not giving the body camera footage. They're not telling people that tactic was in their policy. They're not saying all this stuff to people. So all the chaos reigned, right? I think the more information you give, the better.
Will your transcript be made public so that you can be cleared of that show?
Yeah. I mean, obviously the radio shows out there, that will all be transcribed. There will be legal action taken. All that will be made public. But in a sense, I'll never be cleared from public perception, because people, first thing they hear, that's it. But we will do everything we can to fight that on the internet and off the internet, by whether it's websites or when you do Google searches, you find that. That's all you can do. I mean, obviously they'll be down the road when we start asking for retractions and deletions. Some will do it, some won't. But that battle's all to come, and it's going to take time.
What do you think needs to change in law enforcement? Not what the media says, but if you were making policy, what would you be changing?
I would get my policy more towards Supreme Court language and what's practical. I think we get a lot of policies that are playing to what people not in law enforcement want us to do, but that doesn't always make sense when it comes to the application of that policy. So you get these things like, hey, you can never shoot in a moving car. Well, what if a car is running over cops, right? What if a car is running over citizens? That doesn't make sense. And we get this other policy, well, you can never chase a stolen car. What if the stolen car is a police cruiser with rifles in it? So you can't chase that? I mean, so we get these policies that are implemented based on theory and based on what people want us to do, and we're not putting any practicality into it. If we would just get closer to what Supreme Court language is and what the law is, I think we'd be much better off.
Very good. Major, where can everyone tell us the websites, tell us where we can go to find you.
You can go to stopcowards.com and you get all the information on my book there. And if you go to Amazon and get that, please go leave a review, because I've got obviously a bunch of people leaving really nasty stuff right now that hasn't read my book. But Amazon's been pretty good about that. They understand what's going on. But you can kind of reach out to me there. But also, obviously, Law Officer, where I write for, and I got a staff, a team that kind of keeps that going, and they do a really good job, lawofficer.com. And then right now, defendtheheroes.com kind of tells this story, kind of spreads the word and tell other people about it.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll be putting all of those links in the show notes. We're going to be trying to help you out. I'll be keeping live updates on all of my social media as far as what you're doing, how we can help when you figure out, the next step. And so how
Okay.
we can
Well,
help.
I'll keep you updated. And this is a journey, not just for me, Autumn, but it's for every law enforcement officer out there. I mean,
Yeah, here
we've got to
definitely.
take this negative and turn it into a positive for our profession.
No, and I love what you're doing, and I love creating. You said lean law enforcement. Say it again.
Law Enforcement Advocacy Network.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And unfortunately, this is the thing with law enforcement, okay? And you know it and I know it, is in order for any good to come out of law enforcement or any of us to change, right? Oh, it's always bad. It's always on the downhill. In order for us to
Yep.
come uphill, it's always on the downhill in law enforcement. And I hate that. But you're doing a really good job. And just you're being strong and you're being a role model for all of us. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Autumn, for bringing me on, and thank you for all you do. It's been a tremendous blessing to have you in my life. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Sheepdog Nation, check out the show notes, and I will see you next time.